often they have a center aisle. And it can go up at least
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Geller. I'm the director of the program in Judaic Studies here at Case Western Reserve University. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's conversation with Israeli journalist Yossi Klien, Halevi. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the co-sponsors of today's event. First and foremost is the Baker Nord Center for Humanities here at Case Western Reserve University, meeting in their space. The Baker Nord Center serves as a convener of conversations and a sponsor for research in the humanities, and as such, it serves an important role in the life of the mind at the university. I also want to thank the Departments of History and Religious Studies for their support. I want to thank John Carroll University for helping bring Yossi to Cleveland and sharing his time with us here at Case Western Reserve. Additionally, I want to thank Cleveland Hillel for logistical support, for the nutritional support, and for outreach and bringing some of you here tonight. So I'd like to lead into Yossi's talk with a historical anecdote. Many historians consider the year 1929 to be year zero of the Arab-Israeli conflict. That was the year of the Western Wall riots and the Hebron massacre. In the wake of the riots, the British responded with a series of commissions to decide what to do about Palestine. The Jewish National Council wanted to convince the commissions of inquiry about the antiquity of the Jewish claim to the Temple Mount and the Western Wall, and as a part of that effort, the council asked for the assistance of Gershom Scholem, who was an assistant professor of philosophy at the Hebrew University. Scholem, who was only in his early 30s at the time, was already the world's leading expert on Jewish mysticism. The man knew more about Jewish religious history than nearly anyone in Palestine, possibly the world, already in his early 30s. So he was asked to testify using his Kabbalistic knowledge about the antiquity of Jewish claims to Jerusalem and the Temple. But he refused to do it. He refused to argue the case that the Jews had a religious claim to the Temple Mount. Scholem saw the Arab-Israeli, Arab-Jewish conflict in Jerusalem as a political one, and he did not want to give it a religious cast. He wanted a political solution to a political problem without dragging religion into it. This line of thinking about the conflict has shaped the way I think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I think many, many others see it similarly. If we could only set religion aside and see this as a political dispute, a real estate dispute, there could be a compromise solution. There's too much religion in this dispute. We need less religion. Yossi Klien Halevi challenges us to think differently about the conflict. He wants to bring religion into the equation. He argues that religious Jews and religious Muslims, religious Israelis and religious Palestinians need to be in dialogue with each other and need to be completely forthright about their beliefs regarding the state. They don't need to convince each other of the correctness of their beliefs, and they're not going to do that anyway. But they shouldn't pretend that this is just about land ownership. They don't need to be coy about maximalist beliefs, maximalist demands anchored in religious belief. But Scholem's line of thinking does intersect with Yossi's in one important way. And it's that we need to think about the other and to be in dialogue without an obsession with historical facts. Now, as a historian, I believe that facts matter. Yossi believes facts matter, but you and I may see facts differently. And if we're arguing for the correctness of our views, but basing those arguments on totally different sets of facts, then we're never going to get anywhere. Yossi wants us to talk without descending into a game of historical fact one-upsmanship. Who was there first? Who had the larger population in Palestine? Who had the larger population in Jerusalem, Hebron, and the like. Now, I don't want to reiterate the whole of Yossi's argument for you. That's why he's here in Cleveland. That's why he wrote a book. Yossi Halevi is an American-born Israeli. His own political journey has taken him from the right, not the extreme right, to the center, even the center left, depending on your perspective. He works as a journalist and an author. He explains Israel, its hopes, its dreams, its vision of itself to American audiences. These days, he spends a lot of time and energy engaging in dialogue with Muslim interlocutors, especially American Muslims, and his latest book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, is part of that effort. The first edition was a New York Times bestseller, and Yossi is making his book available for free in Arabic through his website. Tonight, he's going to talk to us about the letters in the book and their mission. We've handed out note cards, which you can ask your questions. I hope we have a spirited conversation at the conclusion of his remarks. But please join me in welcoming Yossi Halevi, the case minister of Israel University.
Thanks very much, Jay. I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be here for several reasons, one of which is that this is my last talk after 2 days of non-stop lecturing. I had 5 talks today, 3 talks yesterday, so I'm really delighted. The first question that the 25th anniversary of the Oslo process, the Oslo peace process, begs to be answered. We've just recently observed the 25th anniversary of the failed Oslo peace process. And the question that rises is, why is peace so elusive between Israelis and Palestinians? Why does there seem to be a direct relationship between the amount of effort that the international community places in trying to solve this problem with the elusiveness of a solution? And really, the more that the international community tries to solve this problem, the less a solution becomes apparent. And I think that one reason why peace is increasingly elusive is because the would-be peacemakers, the diplomats, the international community, focuses on tangible issues, on finding a line on the map, the compromise that will satisfy both sides. And the work of the diplomats is to deal with the concrete issues. But this conflict is really primarily about intangibles. It's the issues of holy places, borders, settlements. Those are outgrowths of a deeper conflict. And this is ultimately a conflict over narratives, over intangibles. It's a conflict over legitimacy, over right to exist, the right to define oneself as a people, as a nation, with self-determination. It's about traumas, memories, fears, the intangibles of this conflict, which the diplomats have no tools to effectively deal with. And so I wrote this book to really try to address those intangibles. Maybe I'll begin, with your indulgence, by reading a page or so of the book. Dear neighbor, I call you neighbor because I don't know your name or anything personal about you. Given our circumstances, neighbor may be too casual a word to describe our relationship. We are intruders in each other's dreams, violators of each other's sense of home. We are living incarnations of each other's worst historical nightmares, neighbors. But I don't know how else to address you. I once believed that we would actually meet and I'm writing to you now with the hope that we still might. I imagine you in your house somewhere on the next hill, just beyond my porch. We don't know each other, but our lives are entwined. And so, neighbor. We live on opposite sides of a concrete wall that cuts through the landscape we share. I live in a neighborhood called French Hill in East Jerusalem. And my apartment is in the last row of houses which you see as step-like structures built into the hillside. From my apartment, I could just barely see the checkpoint you must cross, if you have a permit at all to enter Jerusalem. But I sense the checkpoint's all-pervading presence. Sometimes my early morning routine of meditation and prayer is disrupted by the prolonged honking of frustrated drivers lining up before the checkpoint. Maybe you have been caught in that desperate line. Sometimes I see smoke rising over your hill. Black smoke, I've long since learned, can mean burning tires, accompanied by young people throwing rocks at soldiers. Then there is white smoke, soldiers firing tear gas. How do you manage, if at all, to preserve a measure of normal life? As a Palestinian, you are denied the rights of citizenship that I enjoy as an Israeli. The ongoing disparity between your hill and mine challenges my deepest self-understanding and moral commitments as a Jew and an Israeli. Ending that disparity is one reason why I support a two-state solution. It is just before dawn. I'm in my study facing your hill. The Muezzin calls softly, as if reluctant to disturb the night. I wrap myself in a white prayer shawl and sit cross-legged on a meditation pillow. I touch my forehead to the ground, a nod to the call to prayer coming from across the way. In my most intimate conversations with God, I am hoping to speak to you. I wrote this book, well, actually, it was written as a result of insomnia. I would be pacing late at night. I'm looking at the hill across from where I sit, looking at the lights, hearing the muezzin, and find myself speaking to my neighbor across the way about all of the issues that I wished my neighbor understood about me, and trying to explain ourselves to my neighbor. And finally, one night, I sat down and started writing to your neighbor. Now, this book is an outgrowth of an earlier book that I published, called At the Entrance to the Garden of Eden, which tells the story of a journey that I took in the late 1990s into Palestinian society. I went into mosques, monasteries, refugee camps. And it was an attempt to try to understand who my neighbors were, and to hear their stories, and to experience something of their religious lives. The book that I've written now is, in some sense, a sequel for me, because here I'm trying to explain who I am to my neighbors. So the two books, in some sense, are really bookends to a very long journey. The reason that I believe that it's important for us to hear each other's narratives, the reason I spent a year on that journey into Palestinian society, and the reason that I've written this book, is precisely because this is not a conflict over tangibles, but over narratives. We have been fighting a war over narratives for 100 years. Each side has tried to erase at different stages the narrative of the other side. If you could defeat the narrative, you could somehow erase the presence of the unwanted other. This conflict, I believe, will only be deeply resolved when we begin to open ourselves up to the painful truth that was articulated by the Israeli writer Aleph Bet Yehoshua, who once defined this conflict as right versus right. And that means the very painful process of opening ourselves up to not only the legitimacy of each other's presence in the land that we are fated to share, but also the legitimacy of each side to tell its own story, to have its memories, to have its understanding of itself. Not because we're going to agree. We will not agree. We will not convince each other of the other's narrative. I have spent years hearing the Palestinian narrative, learning to respect the Palestinian narrative. I still have my understanding of what happened in 1948 and 1967, and the same will hold true for the Palestinian side. We are our story. That is who each people is. We are deeply our story. And we won't be giving up our stories, but we do need to accommodate some space in ourselves where we can hear a conflicting voice, because there are compelling voices on the other side. And I would argue that we need to change not our narrative of ourselves, but the story that we tell of the other, because all too often that is a demonizing story. What each side has done when we look at the other is we see the worst incarnation of our historical nightmares. When Palestinians, and I would argue the Arab world generally, looks at us, looks at Israelis, they see the latest stage, the latest wave of colonialist Western invasion. And that reawakens centuries of trauma. When we Israelis look out at the region, when we look out at our Palestinian neighbors and beyond the Arab world, we see the latest incarnation